Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe. Now, Egypt celebrates its National Day every year on the 23rd of July. Now, this year marks the 70th anniversary of Revolution Day, celebrated in Egypt to commemorate the military coup of July 23, 1952, that led to the end of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. To tell us a little bit more about this day and Egypt's place in Africa and relations with South Africa, I'm now joined by Egypt's ambassador to South Africa, Ambassador Ahmed Al-Fadli. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Gunjani, Peter, thank you for hosting me.
So it's 70 years. It's quite a remarkable milestone. Tell us a little bit about their National Day. What is it about? What does it represent? And how do Egyptians embrace it 70 years later?
Well, first, 70 years is not a lot in our 7,000 years of history.
Yeah.
We've been having even revolutions preceding and succeeding that one. And a lot of people ask why still celebrating that specific one. To some people in the ordinary public, I mean, aside from basically having a public holiday where you have an extra day off, but to some of them, you will find that it reminds them of the time when there was the measures that were taken to enhance social justice and the associated social mobility that came with it. To others, of course, it resembles the age where there was increased autonomy in our foreign policy decisions, and that's where we had the chance to assert our Arab identity and enhance our African identity by, of course, our support to liberation movements throughout, while also taking a non-aligned stance during the Cold War. And of course, to others, it also reminds them of the price tag associated with this autonomous policy, namely, I mean, 5 wars between 1948 and 73, and then, of course, the dire economic consequences thereafter.
All right, so a lot of history. And how is it celebrated?
Well, of course, you will find that there are a lot of, there's always a speech by the president, of course, to the public during that day, because it's our national day. And then you will find a lot of discussions about the pros and cons of that revolution and the outcomes, trying to assess the lessons learned as well, of course, and then the way forward, taking it from there.
All right. I know that earlier this week you spoke a little bit about Egypt, its role in Africa, across the continent, and reasserting your position with your African brothers and sisters. Tell us a little bit about that journey and the role that Egypt has played over time.
Right now, at the moment, of course, we consider that we're undergoing an African renaissance in our relations with our African brothers and sisters, primarily centered around 3 pillars, basically peacekeeping and conflict management, as well as integration, economic integration, and development assistance. So when it comes, this is the new phase. I mean, first phase, everybody knows about it, the history of the support of liberation movements and so forth. But now it's a different phase, because almost everybody on the continent now is free. And the way we've been going about it when it comes to peacekeeping, we've now became now the 7th largest contributor to peacekeeping, primarily in the continent, with about 3,200 troops all over the continent in treacherous and dangerous areas as well. We've opened the AU Center in post-conflict reconstruction and development in Egypt. That was just December last year, to help prevent the continent from slipping again into more conflicts and to assist in silencing the guns, basically. And then when it comes to economic integration, we are all aware of Agenda 2063. At the core of it, we know that it's about a number of aspirations, a long-term vision for the continent, centered around a number of 7 aspirations, and then that have been further detailed into a number of priority areas. And then from there, at the core is really integrating the continent and industrializing it as well. And here is where we've been quite progressive with the Africa's Continental Free Trade Area, which under the chairmanship of President El-Sisi of the African Union entered into force then.
Let's talk a little bit about water security, because that's quite an important issue for Egypt in particular, given its reliance on the Nile. But the waters start as far down as Ethiopia. And I know that over time there have been some discussions and challenges to overcome between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt in particular. Take us through that journey, why it's such an important issue for you, and where you are with discussions.
Look, in a nutshell, the whole issue is about how do we manage those water resources. There are two ways to manage it. I mean, in Ethiopia, you will find a lot of people telling you that it's more about an aspiration for hydropower. But when you watch and you follow the actions, you tend to get a feeling, many people would tend to get a feeling that actually it's not simply an aspiration for hydropower, but more about hegemony for water power. And to us, we have viewed that the construction of the current dam in Ethiopia as an existential threat in the absence of a legally binding instrument that governs the filling and operation of that dam. And let me explain why do we take it as an existential threat. Now, there are 11 Nile basin countries in the continent out of the 55 countries that we have in the continent. So in the Nile basin countries, the total rainfall is about 7,000 billion cubic meters, of which 1,660 billion cubic meters fall on the Nile basin itself. Now, in Ethiopia gets around 936 billion cubic meters, half of which, so it's 450 billion cubic meters, fall on the river Nile basin in Ethiopia. It uses the water for various needs, so it has the largest livestock in Africa with 104 million, and it has the agricultural land, so it's as green as my tie. 94% of it is green. And then after all its uses, out of the 450, about 74 billion cubic meters exit Ethiopia into the River Nile, which is shared between currently Egypt and Sudan. Now, Ethiopia has a number of other water basins, and we don't talk about those. But this is a transboundary river. And in a transboundary river, we should agree on how we're going to share this water. So after all of its uses, 10% exits, a little more than 10% exits into neighboring countries, okay? And it's those leftovers that we split between Egypt and Sudan. And Ethiopia wants now to use those leftovers for another use, which is generating power. So this is the real concern now. In Egypt, it's 94% arid. And according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, it's the least country with annual rainfall, only 18.1 millimeters. Now, what does this mean for us? We only get 55.5 billion cubic meters of renewable water from the Nile, but our needs are double that. So what do? We enter into a phase of agriculture and of repeated use of water, as well as we spend a lot of money on desalination and other projects to enhance the efficiency of our water uses. In addition, to protect us from the natural cycles of water, because you do get different rainfalls, we have built a dam in Egypt that helps store some water to protect us during times of drought, as it did back in the 80s. Now, the dam is made to protect us from natural droughts, not man-made droughts. Now, when Ethiopia comes to construct a dam of that magnitude, which is destined to store 74 billion cubic meters, which is the combined annual inflow that Egypt and Sudan gets from the Nile. What this means is that you're making a man-made drought. Now, this man-made drought, if not managed properly, will empty the storage that you have in your own dam in Egypt that is made for natural droughts.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do when you have a natural drought coming? So this is why we have been adamant that there needs to be a legally binding agreement that governs the filling and operation of the dam. Now,
how close are you to that agreement?
Regrettably, we're nowhere close because apparently there is a lack of political will in Ethiopia thus far to conclude an agreement that shouldn't take that long to be concluded.
All right, so we'll be monitoring that story. But another issue, now that you've mentioned droughts, is climate change. Egypt hosting COP27 this year, and it's an important one, particularly for a country like yours, but you'll also be flying the African flag in many ways.
Sure. We are honored to be hosting COP27. That will be in Sharm el-Sheikh in November this year. And we find it an opportunity for Africa's voice to be heard, loud and clear, and it deserves to be heard. Because, regrettably, Africa is suffering a lot from climate change at a time when it was the least contributor to this crisis. And this is where I think a lot needs to be done to assist the continent, not only in mitigating the impacts, but adapting as well to this new challenge that we have.
All right, so powerful messages out of Egypt, but the continent in general.
Well, there needs to be, yes, a strong balance between the mitigation and adaptation, because right now a lot of the funding, for example, in the developed countries, they have already pledged $100 billion, of which nothing much has been spent yet. And then also the private sector has been focusing more on spending on mitigation. We talk about almost 99% on that, while very little on adaptation, which is more needed in the continent.
All right, let's talk about South Africa and Egypt. Diplomatic relations first established as far back as 1942, I think.
Yes.
And over time, obviously, with the interruption of apartheid in between, but there has been a relationship between the two countries, and also you played quite a role in our journey to democracy.
Sure, it's you know, of course, South Africa exists as a nation state in 1910. We all know that, and it has never been the case until these days under the presidency of President El-Sisi and President Cyril Ramaphosa, where we've seen both leaders seeing eye to eye on a number of issues. As you said, in 1942, when South Africa established its first consulate general there in Egypt. A few years later, in 1949, we reciprocated and we established our mission here. But then only a short while after the eruption of our revolution in the 1950s, South Africa withdrew its mission in objection to our support to liberation movements. And officially in 1960, we severed relations with the apartheid regime there. We've received Madiba in 1962, so also this is the 30th anniversary of the 60th, anniversary of his first visit to Egypt. He did not get a chance to meet President Nasser at the time. He was waiting in the waiting room. President Nasser was sitting with President Tito at the time of Yugoslavia. And the meeting went a little over time, and Madiba had to catch a plane back. So he said 2 weeks and I'm coming back, but then he was jailed.
Oh my goodness.
And then that's why back in 1990, when he was freed, the first thing he did was to come to pay his respects to the late President Nasser then in Cairo. And of course, he came a third time in 1997 to Egypt, where he was decorated with the collar of the Nile by President Mubarak. These relations now, what we want to say is that at the moment, the presidency eye to eye, primarily on a number of issues. First, there is the Cape to Cairo road, which we consider as an umbilical cord between both our countries. It passes through 9 countries, constituting a third of the population of the continent and half of its GDP. And it has the potential to actually redefine the boundaries in the continent along African interests as such.
Yeah. All right. And the path to democracy, you did play a role, didn't you?
Yes. Of course, we have been supporting the ANC. We opened an office for the ANC back in the 60s. And I don't know, many people may not know that, but Alfred Enzo, the first foreign minister of South Africa in the post-apartheid era, was actually the head of the ANC bureau in Cairo at that time. So in short, I mean, we weren't sitting on the fence. No. I mean, there was something, a role for us to play then there.
All right. What about the modern day and going forward? What sort of bilaterals and agreements are in place between Egypt and South Africa?
Oh, we have well over 60 agreements in place covering all possible areas that you can think of. Of course, a lot of them need to be reactivated. We've had multiple rounds of our JCC, the Joint Cooperation Committees. But the important thing is, how do you establish strategic relations between two countries that are 10,000 kilometers away? Particularly that the nature of the challenges now on our African continent need us to work together more strongly and more closer in order to be able to face those challenges collectively. And in that perspective, when it comes to integration, of course, here trade and investment are at the center of our efforts as such. In trade, yes, the figures are not as high as we want. Basically around $200 to $300 million, but they are an increase of 61% compared to last year, for example. So we're expecting more, especially with the operationalization of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the removal of non-trade barriers, particularly in the area of pharmaceuticals as well, and also in the power sector. Now, and in agricultural products as well. Now, in terms of investment, we've had major strides at the moment. I think some people may be aware that Vodacom has purchased or is in the process now of purchasing 55%, which is a majority shareholder in Vodafone Egypt. That was a $2.5 billion deal. There is another deal between Sanlam and Allianz merging together, and that would be Sanlam's first major entry into Egypt. And also we have production centers here in South Africa. So we have a company that is producing vehicles called MCV, produces buses. And that's based in Cape Town, and it has been around now since 2007 and has the capacity to cover 20% of South Africa's needs there. So there is a two-way activity going on there, but this would need strong government-to-government relations and strong people-to-people relations.
All right. Talking about people-to-people, I've been to Egypt 3 times. I've enjoyed my stay every time, and I just wonder if there are things that can be done to facilitate the movement between the two countries so that things like tourism can really take off.
Well, I don't know if maybe some people are not aware of that, but on the 1st of April, last April, we have in Egypt decided that all South African nationals will be granted a visa upon entry into Egypt. Yes, the decision was on April Fool's Day, but actually it was true, and it has been implemented and is implemented. And South Africa has been the first African country to benefit from this privilege. Since then, our Egypt Air flights, which we have connecting Johannesburg to Cairo directly, with 4 weekly flights, has been fully booked, and that is encouraging us to actually enhance the presence of Egypt Air here, both vertically and horizontally. We've had a number of influencers, South African influencers, visit also Egypt, and they've been giving back positive reports. So in general, there is a movement. We also hope, of course, maybe I'll seize this opportunity, that the South African government reciprocates soon and allow Egyptian nationals in with the visa upon arrival.
Ambassador, I wish we could talk for longer, but time runs out very quickly on these programs. But I think we did cover quite a bit. So thanks so much indeed for joining us, and congratulations on your National Day and 70th anniversary of Revolution Day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. But since you mentioned people-to-people relations, I guess tomorrow is the 5th time that Banyana is going to be playing, and we wish them the best of luck, of course.
Thank you
for
so
hosting
much.
us.
Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ziyabonga.
That's Ambassador Ahmed Fadli, who's Egypt's ambassador to South Africa, speaking to us ahead of their National Day, which is celebrated every year on the 23rd of July, and this year, the 70th anniversary.